A German Shepherd mother stood on a quiet Virginia porch. 5 tiny puppies pressed beneath her belly, hungry, tired, and refusing to leave. The house belonged to Ryan Mitchell, a Navy SEAL who trusted plans, routines, and problems with clear solutions. But this dog wanted something he couldn't understand. Why had she brought every one of her puppies to his door? Why did she refuse the shelter he prepared, and keep carrying them back beneath one old wooden table? And when Ryan finally discovered who Maggie belonged to, would helping this family mean keeping them safe, or learning when to let them go? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late May had settled gently over the farmland outside Suffolk, Virginia, bringing warm mornings, damp earth, and a pale sky washed clean by rain the night before. Ryan Mitchell had always believed that uncertainty was simply a problem waiting for someone disciplined enough to organize it. At 41, he had spent most of his adult life proving that belief useful. Ryan was a Navy SEAL, now assigned to a training role in Virginia, a tall, broad-shouldered man just over 6'2", with the lean waist of someone who still ran before sunrise, whether anyone required it or not. His dark brown hair was clipped short in the military fashion, with the first threads of gray showing above his temples, and a neatly trimmed beard sharpened the already angular lines of his face. There was a faint white scar near the left side of his jaw, not dramatic enough for strangers to ask about, but noticeable when the light caught it. Ryan was courteous with people, dependable almost to a fault. But he had the irritating habit of solving problems before anyone had actually asked him to. Years earlier, during a training exercise, a young operator under his supervision had been badly injured, despite every procedure being followed correctly. Ryan had never blamed the man, and no official investigation had blamed Ryan either. That almost made it worse. If someone had made an obvious mistake, he could have corrected it. Instead, the accident had taught him something he hated. Sometimes every box could be checked, and something could still go wrong. Since then, Ryan had developed a private religion of lists, backups, schedules, and contingency plans. That morning, his newest project was less dangerous than anything involving the Navy. He was replacing warped cabinet hinges in the old house that had belonged to his grandmother, Grace Mitchell. The modest farmhouse had been empty for several months, and Ryan's family had not yet decided whether to keep it, rent it, or finally let someone else make a life inside its walls. Ryan had volunteered to repair what needed repairing before the decision was made. To him, a house with loose hinges, dripping faucets, and peeling trim represented a collection of manageable problems. Houses did not argue with instructions. He had just tightened the final screw on a cabinet door when he heard scratching from the back porch. Not frantic scratching. 3 slow scrapes, silence, then another. Ryan set down the screwdriver. The sound came again. He crossed the kitchen and opened the back door. For several seconds, neither side moved. An adult female German Shepherd stood 6 feet from him on the weathered porch boards. He looked about 4 years old, perhaps 70 pounds when healthy, though nursing had drawn her waist narrow enough that the outlines of her ribs showed beneath the black and tan coat. Her fur was dusty along the legs and belly, and the longer hair around her neck had lost some of its shine. Her ears remained upright, but one angled slightly toward Ryan while the other tracked noises from the yard. Brown eyes watched him without softness. Beneath and around her were 5 puppies, German Shepherds, all of them, perhaps 6 weeks old. One stout male pup had crawled halfway across another's back and fallen asleep there. A smaller female with a dark mask sat crookedly on her haunches, blinking as though being awake was already an unreasonable demand. Another puppy was chewing the edge of a porch mat. The 4th kept nudging beneath the mother's belly, although she had clearly had enough nursing for the moment. The smallest remained behind one of her forelegs, peering around it with solemn brown eyes. Ryan's first thought was practical. 6 dogs, no visible injuries, mother underweight, puppies mobile, no immediate emergency. His second thought was less useful. Why here? The mother lowered her head when Ryan shifted his weight forward. A quiet growl rolled from her chest. Ryan stopped. "Fair enough," he murmured. He stepped backward and closed the screen door between them. Ryan had dealt with military working dogs before, enough to know that confidence and stupidity sometimes wore similar uniforms. The shepherd was not attacking him. She was establishing a boundary. He could respect that. He filled a large stainless steel bowl with water and found an unopened bag of dog food that his sister had left weeks earlier for a neighbor's Labrador. He placed both just outside the door and returned inside. The mother did not touch either for almost 9 minutes. Ryan knew because he checked the kitchen clock twice. Eventually, she approached the water first, sniffed it, drank deeply, then moved to the food. Even while eating, she positioned herself sideways so she could see both Ryan and the puppies. That bothered him more than he expected, not because she distrusted him, because he understood the behavior. Ryan knew what it meant to eat while still counting exits. By mid-morning, he had decided the porch needed a safer arrangement until he could reach someone. He found an old folding pet pen in the garage, scrubbed it, laid 2 clean moving blankets inside, placed the water in one corner and carried the first puppy toward it. The mother stiffened, but allowed him to move the pup, while Ryan kept his movements slow. He transferred the others. Within 10 minutes, she picked up the largest puppy by the scruff and carried him back out. Ryan stared. She returned for the second, then the third. "You're kidding." She was not. One by one, she carried all 5 beneath an old wooden table at the far end of the porch. The table had belonged to Grace and had faded to a soft gray after decades of weather. Its top was scarred by coffee rings, scratches, and one dark burn mark where Grace had once set down a hot skillet and refused for 20 years to admit doing it. Ryan waited, then moved the puppies back into the pen. The shepherd moved them out again. On the third round, Ryan stood with his hands on his hips. The mother stared at him from beneath the table. "You realize I'm trying to improve your situation?" Her expression suggested that his resume had not impressed her. A car door slammed out front before Ryan could begin a 4th campaign. Amy Mitchell entered through the kitchen, carrying 2 cardboard storage boxes against her hip. At 45, Amy was 4 years older than Ryan and looked enough like him around the eyes that no one doubted they were siblings. He was 5'7", slender without being delicate, with warm, fair skin, shoulder-length chestnut hair threaded naturally with silver, and hazel eyes that seemed perpetually close to amusement. She taught middle school English and possessed a particular patience of a woman who had spent more than 20 years explaining to 12-year-olds why writing an essay entirely in capital letters did not make the argument stronger. Unlike Ryan, Amy rarely rushed to fill silence. It was one of the many qualities in her that irritated him most when she was right. She noticed the dogs through the window. "Ryan?" "I know. There are 6 German shepherds on Grandma's porch. I can count." Amy studied the pen, then the empty blankets, then the family of dogs beneath the table. "You built them a nicer place." "Yes." "And she rejected it." "Repeatedly." Amy's mouth twitched. "Don't." "I didn't say anything. You were about to." "I was about to say that I'm sure she's grateful for your leadership." Ryan gave her a look that had once made young sailors stop talking instantly. Amy walked past him unaffected. They spent the next hour sorting drawers and cupboards, while Ryan occasionally glanced toward the porch. In the bottom of a kitchen cabinet, Amy found a dented metal recipe box covered in tiny painted strawberries. "Oh, Lord," she said softly. Ryan recognized it immediately. Grace Mitchell had been a short, sturdy woman with snow-white hair that refused to stay pinned and the habit of feeding anyone who entered her home, whether they claimed hunger or not. She had died at 87, leaving behind enough handwritten recipes to prove that measurements had always been more of a suggestion to her than a rule. Amy began sorting through the cards. Ryan picked one up. "Yeast rolls. Those were good." "The instructions aren't." Amy glanced over. Ryan read aloud. Flour, butter, yeast, warm milk. Then this. Cover it, leave it alone, give it room to rise. Sounds like Grandma. How long? Amy shrugged. Until it's ready. Ryan frowned. That is not a duration. Amy laughed. Not everything is a military operation. No, some things apparently don't even qualify as instructions. He set the card aside. Amy watched him longer than the joke required. She knew what lists had become for her brother after the training accident, though neither of them mentioned it. Families often learned to walk around certain subjects not because they were forbidden, but because everyone knew where the floorboards creaked. Ryan took photographs of several recipe cards with his phone. We should digitize these before they deteriorate, and then dispose of the damaged ones. Amy stared at him. Absolutely not. They're stained paper. They're Grandma's stained paper. We'd still have the recipes. Amy picked up the yeast roll card and held it against her chest. Sometimes the object is part of the remembering. Ryan chose not to argue further because he knew that tone. There were battles even Navy SEALs were wise enough to avoid. By early afternoon, the mother dog had eaten twice, and the puppies were asleep beneath the table in an untidy pile of paws, ears, and round bellies. Ryan called a local veterinary clinic, explained the situation, then contacted animal control. Both advised him not to force the mother into a vehicle if she was calm, contained, and caring for the litter. Someone could help check for identification and assess the dogs. Ryan agreed. He disliked waiting, but forcing 6 frightened animals into his truck merely so he could feel productive was beginning to seem less like action and more like ego. As he ended the call, Amy stepped onto the porch and stopped beside him. She looked at the table. Then her expression changed. Wait. Ryan turned. What? Amy pointed toward the mother shepherd. Grandma had a friend who used to come here for tea. Evelyn... something. Parker, maybe. She had a German shepherd. Ryan looked back at the dog. How long ago? Years. The dog was young then. Amy narrowed her eyes, searching memory. She always lay under that table. Grandma complained about fur on her slippers. The female shepherd raised her head, not alarmed, simply watching them. Ryan looked at the old table again, at the worn patch of boards underneath it, and then at 5 puppies sleeping against their mother's body. Something shifted inside him. The question was no longer how 6 dogs had wandered onto his porch. Maybe they had not wandered at all. Maybe this mother had carried her puppies somewhere on purpose. And if Amy remembered correctly, then somewhere inside that tired animal's mind was a map older than Ryan's involvement, older than his clean blankets, older than every solution he had tried to impose that morning. For once, Ryan had no checklist for what came next. He stood quietly beside his sister and watched the German shepherd settle her chin across her paws beneath the old table, exactly where she apparently believed she belonged. The next morning came warm and overcast over Suffolk, Virginia, with low clouds hanging above the fields and yesterday's rain still shining in the grass. Ryan Mitchell had slept badly, not because the dogs had made much noise, but because uncertainty had. He had checked the back door twice during the night and once more before dawn. Each time the same arrangement remained on the porch. The German shepherd mother curled beneath Grace's old wooden table, 5 puppies pressed against her belly, as though the place had been reserved for them years before Ryan knew they would need it. By breakfast, he had already written 3 questions on a legal pad. Microchip, owner, medical condition. Amy saw the list beside his coffee and said nothing. She had learned that teasing her brother before caffeine was less entertainment than poor judgment. Dr. Laura Bennett arrived shortly after 9, carrying a black veterinary bag and a handheld microchip scanner. Laura was 48, medium height and solidly built, with freckled, fair skin, gray-green eyes, and thick auburn hair cut just above her shoulders, where several silver strands had begun appearing without apology. She wore faded jeans, practical brown boots, and a navy scrub top beneath a lightweight jacket. Her face was broad and expressive, with smile lines around the eyes, although she was not smiling when she first examined the porch. Laura had spent 23 years treating animals in southeastern Virginia and had acquired the useful habit of distrusting dramatic explanations until simpler ones had been eliminated. She loved animals without pretending they possessed human motives, something Ryan appreciated immediately. "Don't bring her to me," Laura said when Ryan opened the screen door. "Let me go at her speed." "Best sentence anyone said here since yesterday." Amy looked up from the kitchen table. "That's because nobody listened when I said it." Laura stepped onto the porch sideways, rather than approaching directly. The shepherd lifted her head. Her ears angled forward. A low warning formed in her chest but did not become a bark. Laura stopped 6 feet away. "Good," she said quietly. "You told me. I heard you." Ryan watched with interest. Laura did not offer a hand for the dog to sniff. She did not crouch over the puppies or fill the air with the high, sugary voice some adults used around animals and babies. She simply waited. After several minutes, the shepherd stood and approached the water bowl. Laura passed the scanner slowly along the outside of her shoulder. The device chirped. Ryan's posture changed immediately. "Got one?" "Got one." Laura read the number twice, then called her clinic and asked a technician to run it through the registry. While they waited, she visually assessed the mother. "Nursing. Definitely underweight, but not dangerously so from what I can see. No obvious lameness, coat's rough, probably stress and nutrition. Puppies look alert." One pup attempted to climb over a sibling and rolled backward onto his rump. Laura watched him. "Alert may be generous." Amy covered a laugh. A few minutes later, Laura's phone rang. She listened, wrote something on the back of an appointment card, and looked at Ryan. "Her name is Maggie." The shepherd's right ear moved. Ryan looked toward her. Maggie. The dog did not rush to him or wag her tail. She simply watched. That felt appropriate. Laura continued, 4 years old, registered owner is Evelyn Parker. Address is Cedar Mill Road, little over 3 miles from here. Amy straightened. "I knew it." Ryan looked at her. "You're sure?" "Evelyn Parker. That was Grandma's friend." Ryan glanced at Maggie beneath the table. For the first time, the strange behavior had a name attached to it. They tried the telephone number in the microchip registration first. It rang into a voicemail. Ryan left a concise message. 15 minutes later, with Maggie calm and the puppies asleep, Laura suggested they drive to the listed address while Amy remained at Grace's house. Cedar Mill Road curved through old pasture land and scattered houses built before subdivisions had begun chewing at the edges of Suffolk. Evelyn Parker's property sat behind a white mailbox leaning slightly toward the ditch. The house was a 1-story brick ranch with green shutters, a detached wooden shed, and 2 enormous pecan trees shading the front yard. The grass stood nearly knee-high in places. Plastic sheeting covered one section of the crawlspace vents, and a contractor's van was parked near the side yard. A stack of removed floorboards lay beneath a blue tarp. Ryan walked toward the porch, but stopped when a woman from the neighboring property called across the fence. "You looking for Evelyn?" Her name was Nancy Holloway, 66. A retired pharmacy technician with a compact build, short white blonde hair and tanned forearms, that suggested she spent more time in her vegetable garden than indoors. She wore denim overalls over a sunflower yellow t-shirt and had the brisk, observant manner of someone who knew every car on the road, but considered gossip useful only when it solved something. Ryan introduced himself and explained Maggie had turned up at another property. Nancy's face tightened with immediate relief. "You found that dog?" "And 5 puppies. Oh, thank God." Nancy leaned against the fence. "Evelyn's been beside herself, though I'm not sure anyone told her Maggie disappeared right away. Her son didn't want her worrying." Ryan's mouth hardened slightly at that sentence, though he kept his opinion to himself. Nancy explained what had happened. 7 weeks earlier, Evelyn had fallen in the kitchen and fractured her hip. An ambulance took her to the hospital, followed by surgery and a rehabilitation center. Maggie had been visibly pregnant at the time. Evelyn's son lived out of state and had arranged for a local caretaker to feed her and check the house. "Maggie had the pups in that shed," Nancy said, pointing behind the house. 5 of them. I saw the caretaker carrying extra food back there." "Why was the house being worked on?" Laura asked. "Moisture under the floor, mold too, from what they told me. Insurance finally approved part of it. Contractors started 4 days ago, drilling, pulling boards, fans running under the house." Ryan looked toward the shed. "When did Maggie disappear?" 3 days ago." The sequence assembled itself neatly in his head. Evelyn gone, newborn litter, caretaker coming and going, then unfamiliar men, machinery, vibrations, smells, opened gates, a problem, a response. But still one unanswered question: why Grace's house? Nancy supplied another piece without realizing it. Evelyn used to walk that dog everywhere before her knees started bothering her. Back when Maggie was young, they'd go clear past the old Mitchell place. Ryan turned. "You knew my grandmother?" Nancy smiled. "Everybody within 5 miles knew Grace Mitchell. Half of us were fed by her whether we wanted to be or not." That sounded painfully accurate. When Ryan and Laura returned, Amy was on the porch floor with an old photograph album open beside her. Maggie remained beneath the table, tolerating Amy at a careful distance. "I found something," Amy said. She turned the album around. The photograph was nearly 4 years old. Grace sat at the porch table in a lavender cardigan, silver white hair escaping from a loose bun. Across from her sat another woman, slim and upright, perhaps late 60s then, with neatly waved gray hair, delicate features, and the kind of careful posture Ryan associated with women who had been taught as girls never to slump at the dinner table. A young German shepherd lay beneath them. Maggie. Her muzzle had been darker then, her body lean and adolescent, ears too large for her head. Ryan stared from the photograph to the living dog. "Same table," Amy nodded. "Evelyn came here a lot that summer. Grandma and Evelyn traded recipes, argued about tomatoes, complained about utility bills. Maggie stayed under there because Grandma wouldn't let dogs in the kitchen." Ryan almost smiled. There was nothing mystical about it after all. Maggie had not somehow chosen Ryan. She had not sensed that a Navy SEAL lived behind the door. She had not arrived because fate had identified the correct hero. She remembered geography, smell, routine. Perhaps the shade beneath that table, Grace's voice, the absence of hands reaching for her. Ryan found that explanation more moving than the miraculous version would have been. Memory did not have to be human to matter. By late afternoon, he had called 3 numbers before reaching the rehabilitation center where Evelyn Parker was staying. Privacy rules slowed the conversation until staff confirmed that Evelyn was willing to speak with the man who had found her dog. A woman's voice finally came through, thin with age and fatigue, but clear. "Mr. Mitchell?" Ryan stood near the kitchen window. "Yes, ma'am." "This is Evelyn Parker." At 73, Evelyn sounded more composed than Ryan expected. Amy had described her as once tall and elegant, with silver gray hair always arranged neatly, pale blue eyes, and a stubborn independence that had survived widowhood, arthritis, and the gradual shrinking of the social world that often came with age. Grace had liked her precisely because Evelyn could disagree without becoming cruel. Ryan explained carefully. "Maggie is safe. She has 5 puppies with her. They're all here at my grandmother Grace's house." Silence. Ryan checked the phone screen to make sure the call had not dropped. Then Evelyn asked only one question. "Is she under the table on the porch?" Ryan looked through the glass. Maggie lay on her side beneath the weathered wooden table. 5 small black and tan bodies were piled against her. One puppy sleeping upside down with both hind legs resting across a sibling. "Yes," Ryan said softly. "She is." The breath on the other end broke. Then Evelyn began to cry. Ryan did not interrupt. For once he understood that silence was not an empty space requiring correction. He looked at Maggie beneath the table and finally understood what she had done. She had not gone looking for someone new. She had taken her children back to somewhere old enough to remember as safe. The following morning was warmer over Suffolk, Virginia, with damp air clinging to the fields and a thin veil of clouds softening the early summer light. Ryan Mitchell had already been awake for nearly 2 hours when Dr. Laura Bennett returned to Grace's house, this time carrying a scale, vaccination supplies, deworming medication, and the expression of a woman who expected at least one puppy to urinate somewhere inconvenient. Maggie watched from beneath the old porch table as Laura set everything down. The German Shepherd mother looked less exhausted after 2 days of regular meals, but nursing 5 puppies had still carved her waist narrow beneath the black and tan coat. Her amber-brown eyes remained alert, and she followed every movement Laura made with the steady concentration of an animal that had survived recent uncertainty by assuming nothing was harmless until proven otherwise. Laura examined Maggie first. He listened to her heart, checked her gums, ran practiced fingers along her abdomen, inspected her mammary glands, and took her temperature, while Ryan stood nearby holding a bowl of small pieces of cooked chicken. Maggie accepted the chicken without accepting Ryan. She ate each piece and immediately looked back at Laura. "She's underweight," Laura said, "but not dangerously. No fever, no mastitis, no obvious infection. She needs calories, water, rest, and less excitement than you're probably planning to provide." Ryan glanced at her. "I wasn't planning excitement." Laura looked toward the clipboard on the kitchen counter, where Ryan had already drawn columns labeled morning weight, evening weight, food intake, stool, medication, and notes. Of course not. The puppies were next. One by one, Laura weighed them, checked ears, teeth, bellies, paws, eyes, and hydration. None showed signs of serious illness. They needed deworming, a vaccination schedule, good nutrition, and continued monitoring while they moved toward weaning. Ryan felt a tension in his shoulders ease. He had not realized how much of him had been waiting for bad news. After the examination, Laura called Evelyn at the rehabilitation center. Evelyn's house was still under repair, and the contractor estimated at least several more weeks before the floors, crawl space, and ventilation system would be ready. Evelyn herself was not yet steady enough to return home without help. The solution was obvious before anyone said it. Maggie and the puppies would remain at Grace's house. "For now," Ryan said. "For now," Laura agreed. Amy, standing at the sink, smiled into her coffee. Ryan noticed. "What?" "Nothing." "That wasn't nothing. I'm just enjoying how often you've said 'for now' since 6 dogs arrived." Ryan ignored her. Within an hour, he had created a system. 5 puppies, 5 colored marks on removable collar bands, 5 weight records, a feeding chart for Maggie, a gradual weaning schedule, medication dates, cleaning times, a diagram showing where water, food, bedding, and waste areas should be located. Amy stared at the board he had propped against the kitchen wall. "You've created corporate infrastructure for puppies." "It prevents mistakes." "They're 6 weeks old, Ryan." "Exactly. They have no standards." Laura laughed hard enough to snort. The names came next, though Ryan had not intended them to. Amy picked up the largest male first. He was a broad-pawed, black and tan pup, with a thick, dark saddle, a blunt muzzle, and ears that still leaned outward instead of standing properly. He had already attempted to climb over the lower edge of the pet pen twice that morning, and had shown no evidence that failure had educated him. "Scout," Amy said. "No." She looked at Ryan. "I wasn't asking." Scout immediately tried to chew the zipper on Laura's medical bag. "That one is either brave or stupid," Ryan said. "Those qualities overlap more than people admit," Laura replied. The second puppy was a female with a narrower face, warm, tan eyebrows, and dark, expressive eyes. She tolerated Laura's examination, but stiffened whenever anyone tried to lift her too quickly. Once set down, she immediately returned to Maggie's side and sat watching the humans with visible suspicion. "Daisy," Amy decided. Ryan frowned. "She doesn't look like a daisy." "What does a daisy look like?" "I don't know. Friendlier?" Amy stared at him. "Please never name children." The third puppy was a stocky male, whose most consistent personality trait was his belief that all food belonged to him. He had already pushed Scout away from a softened kibble mixture and attempted to stand with both front paws inside the bowl. "Milo," Amy said. Milo sneezed directly into Ryan's hand. Ryan wiped his palm on a towel. "Outstanding." Penny, the fourth, was a lively female with slightly lighter tan legs and a narrow black stripe running down her forehead. She spent less time playing with her siblings than investigating the edges of every enclosure. While the others wrestled, Penny tested corners. When Ryan blocked one gap, she immediately moved to another. "That dog is conducting a security audit," Ryan muttered. Amy smiled. "Maybe she's your favorite." "I don't have a favorite." Which is exactly what people say before they have a favorite. The smallest puppy was last. Bean was a male, noticeably lighter than Scout, though not frail. His black mask made his brown eyes appear unusually large, and one ear folded sideways, while the other made an uncertain attempt at standing. Bean rarely joined the first rush toward food or attention. He watched. When Scout stumbled into something new, Bean studied the result. When Penny tested a barrier, Bean waited to see whether she succeeded. He was not cowardly. He simply seemed unwilling to spend courage without information. Amy named him Bean because, as she explained, he looks like somebody accidentally planted him. Ryan objected to all 5 names. Names imply permanence. Amy looked up from Bean. "No, names imply existence. They'll be leaving. That doesn't make them inventory." Ryan said nothing. The remark irritated him precisely because some part of him understood it. He had spent years believing detachment made transitions cleaner. In training, operators rotated. Assignments ended. Equipment was returned. Houses were sold. People moved. Names carried emotional weight, and Ryan had become skilled at pretending emotional weight was an inefficient load. Amy scratched Bean gently beneath the chin. "Something leaving later doesn't mean you have to treat it like it's already gone." Ryan turned toward the porch. Maggie was watching them. By afternoon, he had finished preparing what he considered a far better sleeping area in the enclosed section of Grace's old garden shed. It had shade, ventilation, fresh bedding, washable flooring, no exposed tools, and a baby gate separating a small exercise area. Ryan even adjusted a window latch so Maggie could hear outdoor sounds without having direct access to the yard. He showed Laura. She nodded approvingly. "This is excellent." Ryan allowed himself half a second of satisfaction. Maggie ruined it 12 minutes later. She entered the shed, smelled every corner, drank from the water bowl, turned around, and walked back to the porch. Ryan waited. Maggie returned for Scout. She picked him up by the scruff and carried him beneath Grace's table. Then Daisy, then Milo, then Penny. Finally Bean. Ryan stood beside the empty bedding. "No." Maggie lay down beneath the porch table. Ryan carried Scout back to the shed. Maggie followed and removed him. Ryan returned Daisy. Maggie removed Daisy. By the time Ryan reached for Milo, Laura touched his arm. "Stop. She needs a cleaner environment. She needs an environment she believes she can defend. It's a table. It gives her a wall behind her, shade above her, sight lines to the yard, and one main direction of approach." Ryan looked at the table. Laura continued, "You designed the shed according to what makes sense to you. Maggie is making decisions according to what makes sense to a nursing mother who has recently been displaced. The shed is objectively safer, maybe, but she doesn't read inspection reports." Amy leaned against the porch rail. "Another female rejecting your leadership." Ryan pointed at her. "You are dangerously comfortable here." That evening, Amy attempted Grace's yeast roll recipe. Ryan made the mistake of watching. "How long are you letting that rise?" Amy covered the bowl with a towel. "Until it rises." That is circular reasoning. That is bread. You need a time reference, Ryan. 20 minutes? 40? Ryan. Room temperature matters. Amy turned toward him. "If you touch this bowl, I will break your measuring cup." He raised both hands and backed away. 40 minutes later, Amy checked the dough too early, decided it had risen enough, shaped the rolls, and baked them. They emerged dense, pale, and impressively flat. Ryan picked one up. This could stop a door. Amy stared at it, then at him. They both started laughing. It surprised Ryan how good the laughter felt. Nothing had been solved. The bread was terrible. Maggie still refused his perfect shed. 5 puppies were already making the porch smell like a barnyard. Yet for several minutes, none of that required correction. That night, Ryan slept in Grace's old downstairs bedroom so he could hear the dogs if anything changed. Sometime after midnight, a soft scratching woke him. He opened his eyes.
Maggie stood in the doorway.
Her silhouette was dark against the hall light. Ryan sat up. "What is it?" She scratched once at the wooden floor, then turned her head toward the hallway. Ryan followed. Bean lay alone halfway between the porch and the kitchen, curled into a small black and tan ball. Somehow he had wandered farther than usual and simply fallen asleep. Ryan crouched. His hand moved automatically toward the puppy, then he stopped. Maggie was watching him. Ryan slowly withdrew his hand. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Maggie stepped forward, lowered her head, gently took Bean by the loose skin at the back of his neck, and carried him toward the porch. Ryan followed, but did not interfere. She placed Bean among the others beneath the table, circled once, and lay down. Bean pushed blindly against her belly. Maggie looked at Ryan, then she lowered her head. Ryan stood there in the dark hallway, longer than necessary. He had assumed Maggie came to get him because something needed fixing. Maybe she had only wanted to know where he was. The distinction should have felt insignificant. Instead, it unsettled him. Ryan had spent much of his life believing that if someone came to him, his obligation was to produce an answer, a plan, an action. But Maggie had asked nothing of him. She had simply made sure he was present. For the first time, Ryan wondered whether being useful and being needed were not always the same thing. Early June brought hotter afternoons to Suffolk, Virginia, and the kind of heavy morning air that promised thunderstorms without ever quite delivering them. By then, the 5 puppies had grown enough to turn Grace Mitchell's porch into a small republic governed by appetite, curiosity, and poor judgment. Ryan's tracking board had expanded accordingly. Scout had gained weight faster than the others. Daisy had learned that retreating beneath the table usually prevented unwanted handling. Penny had discovered 2 new weaknesses in the temporary gate. Milo had developed the unpleasant conviction that any food bowl within reach belonged exclusively to him. Bean still watched everything before joining in, as if he suspected the world might be conducting an experiment and had wisely decided not to volunteer first. Ryan knew these details because he had written them down. The trouble began when Mark Parker arrived from Ohio and reminded him that knowing something well did not necessarily make it his to decide. Mark was 49, a little under 6 feet tall, with a heavy-shouldered build softened around the waist by too many interstate meals and too little sleep. His dark blonde hair had thinned noticeably at the crown, and several days of rough brown and gray stubble covered a square jaw that looked more tired than hard. He wore khaki pants, a wrinkled blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, and expensive running shoes that had clearly never been used for running. Mark worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company outside Columbus, Ohio, and had spent the last 7 weeks dividing himself between conference calls, his wife and teenage daughter, hospital paperwork, insurance forms, contractors, and the 7-hour drive to Virginia. He was not naturally cold. Under ordinary circumstances, he was the sort of man who remembered birthdays, tipped servers too much, and called his mother every Sunday. But fatigue had sharpened him. Problems now arrived to Mark as items demanding closure. He stopped at the porch steps and stared at the dogs. Maggie stood. Scout barked once because Scout considered silence a missed opportunity. Mark rubbed both hands down his face. There really are 5. Ryan leaned against the porch rail. You thought we were exaggerating? I was hoping someone had counted wrong. Amy, seated near the door, said, "That becomes less likely once you reach 5. Mark almost smiled, but the expression disappeared when Maggie stepped protectively in front of the puppies. "Maggie," he said. Her ears moved. She did not approach him. Something small changed in his face. Ryan noticed, because he knew what disappointment looked like when a man tried to disguise it as practicality. Mark had known Maggie for years, though she belonged to Evelyn. He had bought her a red ball one Christmas, driven her to a veterinary appointment when his mother had cataract surgery, and complained repeatedly about the amount of fur she left in his rental cars. None of that guaranteed she would welcome him now. "She's been through a lot," Ryan said. "So has everybody." The answer came too quickly. Mark immediately seemed to regret it. Inside the kitchen, Ryan poured coffee, while Mark spread documents across Grace's old table. Contractor estimates, rehabilitation bills, insurance correspondence, a printed boarding price sheet. Ryan looked at the last page. "You already called kennels. I called 3. For Maggie? For when the puppies are old enough to leave her?" Amy folded her arms. Mark noticed. "Please don't look at me like that. I'm trying to keep 6 animals from becoming another crisis." "They're not 6 animals to Mom," Amy said. "They're also not 6 animals to you," Mark replied. "Which is easy when you're not paying for her rehabilitation or trying to figure out whether she'll need home assistance." Ryan stayed quiet. Mark explained his proposal. Once the puppies reached an appropriate age, a reputable German Shepherd rescue could handle screening and placement. Maggie could stay at a professional boarding facility until Evelyn's house was repaired and she was physically ready. It was efficient, reasonable, and completely unacceptable to Evelyn. They called her that afternoon. Evelyn appeared on the tablet from her rehabilitation room, silver gray hair brushed neatly despite the hospital-style blouse she wore and the fatigue around her pale blue eyes. She sat upright in a chair rather than in bed, as if posture alone could bargain with age. "No," she said when Mark finished. "Mom, just listen." "I did. The rescue has experience placing shepherds." "I'm sure they do." "And Maggie would be safe at boarding." "I'm sure she would." Mark exhaled. "Then what is the problem?" "The problem is that you have already arranged my life as if I've died." Silence. Ryan looked away. Mark's face tightened. "That isn't fair." "No," Evelyn said, "it isn't. Neither is waking up after surgery and discovering everyone has started making permanent decisions because I temporarily need help standing." Mark sat back. Evelyn continued more gently. "The puppies will need homes. I understand that. I cannot keep 6 dogs, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But they are Maggie's puppies. I want to know where they go. I want to be part of choosing." Ryan found himself agreeing with her immediately. "I can help with that," he said. Mark glanced at him. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Thank you." That should have been the moment Ryan learned the lesson. Instead, he merely changed uniforms. Over the following week, Ryan turned puppy placement into an operation. He contacted breed clubs, veterinary offices, trainers, and several families referred through Laura. He made a spreadsheet with columns for property size, fencing, previous dog ownership, working hours, children, other animals, veterinary references, and training plans. He color-coded prospects. He told himself he was doing what Evelyn had requested. Technically, he was helping. He did not notice that he had begun choosing. Madison Mitchell noticed. Madison was Amy's 19-year-old daughter and therefore Ryan's niece, a slim young woman with long, dark blonde hair, usually twisted into an untidy knot, clear hazel eyes like her mother's, and a scattering of freckles across her nose. She was home from her first year studying communications at Virginia Commonwealth University and possessed the easy digital fluency Ryan regarded with equal parts admiration and suspicion. Madison was warm without being sentimental, and had inherited Amy's uncomfortable talent for saying something simple that made Ryan feel as though he had missed an obvious road sign. She came to the house one afternoon carrying her phone, a small tripod, and a bag of iced coffees. "What's that for?" Ryan asked, pointing at the tripod. "Evelyn wants videos. You can send photos." Photos lie. Ryan frowned. Madison crouched near the puppies. Everybody photographs them when they look adorable. Evelyn wants people to see what they're actually like. Within 20 minutes, she had evidence. Scout launched himself into Milo hard enough to knock both puppies into the water bowl. Daisy disappeared beneath a chair when a delivery truck stopped outside. Penny seized the dangling charger cable from Madison's phone and dragged the entire power bank across the porch. Milo growled when Scout approached his food. Ryan immediately moved toward him. Madison held up a hand.
Wait.
Milo is guarding. I know. That's the point. She recorded a short clip while Ryan carefully separated the feeding spaces. He's not a bad dog, Madison said afterward, but whoever takes him should know. Bean supplied the least dramatic video. He remained beneath a chair for nearly 8 minutes while Madison sat sideways several feet away and ignored him. Eventually, he emerged, sniffed her shoe, and retreated again. Madison smiled. Perfect. That was 8 minutes of nothing. That was 8 minutes of Bean. Evelyn loved the videos. Ryan heard her laugh over the phone when Penny attacked the charger cable. Send that one to anyone interested in her, Evelyn said. Really? Especially that one. Ryan looked at the spreadsheet on his laptop. You don't think it'll discourage people? I hope it discourages the wrong people. The sentence stayed with him, but not deeply enough. By the end of the week, Ryan had narrowed 14 inquiries to 6 strong candidates. He assigned Scout to a retired police officer with acreage. Daisy seemed best suited to a quiet couple without children. Milo had a candidate experienced with resource guarding. Penny matched a family with a fenced property and an active lifestyle. Bean had 2 possibilities. None of these were final, Ryan told himself. They were recommendations. Still, the names had already been placed beside the dogs. That evening, he arranged a video call with Evelyn. Mark joined from Ohio. Amy and Madison sat at the kitchen table. Ryan positioned his laptop so the spreadsheet filled the screen. I've narrowed the applicants, he began. I checked veterinary references, property details, schedules, prior shepherd experience. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Ryan explained each family carefully. He had done excellent work. Every concern had an answer. Every puppy had a likely destination. When he finished, he expected questions about the candidates. Instead, Evelyn looked directly into the camera. Ryan, did you ever ask me what I wanted? He paused. I thought the goal was to find good homes. It is. These are good homes. I'm not arguing with that. Ryan felt the familiar irritation that came when the facts were correct but somehow insufficient. I was trying to make this easier for you. Evelyn's expression did not harden. That made the question worse. Easier for me? She asked quietly. Or easier for the part of you that cannot stand not knowing what happens next? Nobody spoke. Even Mark remained silent. Ryan looked at the spreadsheet. 16 columns, reference checks, notes, color codes. Every uncertainty reduced until almost nothing remained, except the person whose puppies he had been planning around. The call ended a few minutes later without anger and without resolution. Ryan stayed at the kitchen table after everyone else moved away. Outside, Scout barked at something imaginary. Penny rattled the gate. Milo complained because dinner had ended. Daisy disappeared beneath the table, and Bean watched the others from the edge of the porch. Ryan stared at his nearly perfect plan. For the first time, he understood that efficiency did not protect a person from being wrong. Sometimes it only allowed them to arrive at the wrong place faster. 3 weeks later, early summer had settled over Suffolk, Virginia, with warm mornings, cicadas beginning their long metallic chorus in the trees, and afternoon clouds gathering over fields already turning a deeper green. Ryan Mitchell had apologized to Evelyn Parker the morning after their difficult video call. He had not prepared the apology in advance, which for Ryan was almost an act of rebellion against himself. He simply called her and said, I made decisions that weren't mine to make. Evelyn had allowed a small silence before answering, Yes, you did. Ryan waited for the softer sentence people usually offered after accepting an apology. Evelyn did not give him one. Instead, she said, "So don't do it again." Strangely, Ryan respected her more for that. They agreed that every decision concerning Maggie and the puppies would include Evelyn from then on. Ryan could research, recommend, organize, and warn. He could not quietly turn recommendation into authority. It sounded simple when spoken aloud. Living by it was proving harder. By the time Evelyn was approved for a short home visit, the loudest repairs at her house were complete. The damaged floorboards had been replaced, the crawl space treated, the industrial fans removed, and the constant drilling that had driven Maggie away was gone. Evelyn was still not cleared to return permanently, but a physical therapist wanted to see how she managed familiar rooms for several hours before discharge planning moved forward. Mark drove his mother from the rehabilitation center. Ryan followed in his truck with Maggie, and the 5 puppies secured safely behind him, while Amy and Madison came separately with food, water, blankets, and enough supplies to suggest they were relocating a small army rather than visiting for an afternoon. Ryan had been careful not to say what he expected from the reunion. That did not mean he had no expectations. He imagined Maggie recognizing the driveway before the truck stopped. He imagined her ears lifting, her tail moving, perhaps a whine. He imagined Evelyn stepping slowly onto the porch while Maggie crossed the yard and buried her head against the woman's chest. Ryan disliked sentimental movies, yet somewhere inside him he had already staged the scene with embarrassing precision. Maggie ruined the script before Evelyn even reached the front walk. Ryan opened the rear door and clipped on her leash. Maggie stepped down carefully. Her black and tan coat had regained some shine during the weeks at Grace's house, and her waist no longer looked quite so hollow, though nursing still kept her lean. She sniffed the driveway, then the grass. Her ears moved constantly. Behind her, the puppies complained from their travel crates. Then Mark's car arrived. Ryan turned. Evelyn emerged slowly from the passenger seat. At 73, she still carried traces of the elegant woman in Amy's old photograph. But 7 weeks of surgery, rehabilitation, poor sleep, and institutional meals had altered her. She had lost weight through the shoulders and face. Her silver-gray hair, once carefully waved, had been cut shorter for convenience, and now curved softly around her ears. Her pale blue eyes remained sharp, but deep shadows sat beneath them. She wore cream trousers, a light blue blouse, and orthopedic shoes, and she leaned heavily on a gray aluminum walker. Her steps were cautious and uneven. She smelled faintly of antiseptic soap, laundry detergent, and the medicinal environment she had lived in for nearly 2 months. Maggie saw her. The shepherd stopped. Ryan felt the leash go still in his hand. Evelyn's face changed instantly. "Maggie?" Her voice was gentle. Maggie stood nearly 10 feet away, body rigid. Her ears pointed forward, her mouth closed.
Evelyn smiled, though uncertainty had already entered it.
"Come here, girl." Maggie did not move. Mark looked from his mother to the dog. "Maggie," he said more firmly. The shepherd took 1 step backward. No one spoke. Ryan had expected many possible problems that afternoon. Maggie jumping on Evelyn and knocking her down, puppies getting under the walker, Evelyn tiring too quickly, a disagreement over where the dog should stay. He had not planned for rejection. Human beings were greedy with reunion. Ryan realized it in that moment. They wanted recognition to be immediate because anything slower felt like evidence that love had weakened while people were apart. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the walker handles. "She doesn't know me." "She knows something," Ryan said. It was not a useful answer. Mark stepped forward. "Give me the leash." Ryan turned toward him. "I'll bring her closer." "No." Mark frowned. "Mom's been waiting 7 weeks. So has Maggie. She's a dog, Ryan. And she just backed away." Mark lowered his voice. "You're going to let my mother stand there while her own dog acts like she's a stranger?" The cruel thing was that Ryan understood him. Every instinct in Ryan wanted to shorten the distance. He could walk Maggie forward in 5 seconds. Perhaps once she smelled Evelyn closely enough, recognition would arrive, problem solved. His hand tightened around the leash. Then he remembered a spreadsheet full of excellent decisions nobody had asked him to make. Ryan unclipped the leash. Maggie stayed where she was. Mark stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Nothing. That's your plan?" "For the next few minutes." Mark made a sound of disbelief, but Evelyn lifted one hand. "Stop!" Both men looked at her. Evelyn's eyes were wet now, but her voice remained controlled. "I am tired of men moving things closer to me because they think I can't wait." Mark looked wounded.
Ryan felt the sentence land on him too.
Amy stepped onto the porch and pulled out a chair. "Come sit with me," she said. Evelyn maneuvered toward the chair. The effort made her jaw tighten. She hated being watched while using the walker. Ryan could tell. There was humiliation in needing concentration for an act one had performed casually for 70 years. She sat. Maggie remained near the lawn. The puppies were released into a portable pen several yards away. Scout immediately attacked the corner of a blanket. Penny began searching for structural weaknesses. Milo discovered the water bowl and planted himself beside it like a corrupt official controlling a public resource. Daisy stayed near the back. Bean sat down and watched everyone. Evelyn laughed once, despite herself. "Those are definitely hers." Maggie glanced toward the puppies, then toward Evelyn. Still nothing. 10 minutes passed. Evelyn spoke with Amy about the repairs. He complained that the contractors had put one cabinet handle in Sittering. Ryan checked it and discovered the handle was, in fact, slightly crooked. "Don't fix it now," Evelyn said. Ryan looked at her. "I saw your hand move." He put the screwdriver back in his pocket. 15 minutes passed. Maggie moved closer to the porch by perhaps 2 feet, sniffed the ground, and stopped again. 20 minutes. Nobody called her. The silence became uncomfortable in the way silence often did when people had expected emotion and received uncertainty instead. Ryan felt Madison watching without recording. She had taken her phone out earlier, then quietly placed it face down on the porch rail. "Not filming?" Ryan asked. Madison shook her head. "Not everything needs proof." That sentence stayed with him. Later, while Evelyn rested inside, Ryan attempted Grace's yeast rolls in the kitchen. Amy had dared him to try after his endless criticism of her first batch. Ryan measured everything precisely. Too precisely. He kneaded the dough until it was smooth, then smoother, then something beyond smooth that Amy described as having the emotional texture of a tire. "You're overworking it," she warned. "It's still sticky." "It's supposed to be alive, Ryan. Stop interrogating it." He kneaded twice more. Amy walked away. The rolls came out heavy enough to confirm her diagnosis. Madison picked one up, bounced it once in her palm, and said, "Evelyn, do you need another doorstop?" For a second, Evelyn simply stared at her. Then she laughed, not politely, not carefully. She laughed until one hand pressed against her ribs and tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. Mark started laughing too. Amy leaned against the counter. Even Ryan surrendered. The rolls were terrible. The afternoon was not. Near the end of the visit, Evelyn sat again on the porch. Fatigue had drained some color from her face, and Mark had already begun loading things back into the car. Maggie stood near the steps.
Then, without anyone calling her, she walked forward. One step. Another. Evelyn did not move. Maggie climbed onto the first porch board and stopped beside the walker. Evelyn slowly lowered one hand, palm relaxed. Maggie leaned forward and smelled her fingers. The contact lasted barely a second. Then the shepherd stepped away and lay down on the boards, perhaps 2 feet from Evelyn's shoes. No tail wagging. No leap into her arms, no cinematic reunion. Evelyn looked down at her. Her eyes filled again, but this time she smiled. "Take your time, Maggie." Ryan stood near the kitchen doorway and heard every word. He knew she was speaking to the dog. But looking at Mark gathering his mother's things,
at Evelyn sitting in a house she was not yet allowed to return to, and at his own hands resting uselessly at his sides. Ryan understood that Maggie was not the only one who needed permission to move slowly. Some distances, he was beginning to learn, were not problems simply because they could not be crossed on command. By mid-July, Suffolk had settled into the heavy heat of a Virginia summer. Afternoon air shimmered above the roads, cicadas screamed from the oak trees, and even the puppies had learned that the coolest place on Grace's porch was the strip of shade beneath the old wooden table. They were no longer the round, unsteady bundles Ryan had first found 6 weeks earlier. Scout's legs had lengthened. Daisy's ears were beginning to stand. Milo had developed the chest and confidence of a puppy, convinced dinner existed solely for his benefit. Penny could locate a weak section of fencing with the efficiency of a burglar, and Bean remained the smallest, quietest, and most deliberate of the five. The time everyone had known was coming had finally arrived. The puppies were old enough to begin leaving Maggie. This time, Ryan did not build the process first and invite Evelyn into it afterward. Evelyn sat at Grace's kitchen table during the first meeting, still using a cane on stronger days and a walker when fatigue caught her. Her silver-gray hair had regained some of its careful shape, and a little color had returned to her face. Maggie lay beside her chair, not touching her feet but close enough that Evelyn could lower a hand without reaching. That small distance had become their new understanding. Ryan placed his laptop on the table, but did not open the spreadsheet. Evelyn noticed. "Well," she said, "either you've made progress or the battery is dead." Amy smiled into her coffee. Ryan ignored both women. "You tell us what matters first." Evelyn considered the question. "Not who has the biggest yard, not who says they love shepherds the most. I want people who understand the dog they're actually taking home." Laura Bennett nodded. "That's a better place to start." Mark sat across from Ryan, quieter than usual. He had returned from Ohio for several days and looked less frayed than during his previous visit, though the gray in his stubble seemed more obvious. He did not offer a solution. That, Ryan noticed, was new. The first couple arrived for Scout on Saturday morning. David and Marlene Foster were both in their early 60s and lived on 12 acres outside Chesapeake. David was a tall, barrel-chested man with a shaved head, a white horseshoe mustache, and the confident voice of someone accustomed to being heard. He had owned a construction company for 30 years before retiring. Marlene was petite, carefully dressed with short copper-red hair and pale skin freckled across the cheeks. She was warm with the puppies and knelt immediately to let Scout sniff her hands. On paper, they looked excellent. Large property, fenced yard, previous dog experience, financial stability. Scout loved David's boots within 30 seconds. Then David said, "We'd mainly keep him outside near the equipment barn. I've had some trouble with people cutting across the back acreage. A shepherd his size should discourage that." Evelyn's expression changed. "He'd sleep outside?" "Most nights. We've got a heated kennel." David said it without cruelty. To him it was reasonable. Evelyn looked at Scout, who was currently attempting to untie David's shoelace. "No." David blinked. "Excuse me? I don't think you're the right home for him." Marlene looked embarrassed. David looked offended. Ryan felt the old instinct rise. Explain, justify, soften, negotiate. He did none of those things. Evelyn simply said, "Scout needs more family than property." The Fosters left politely, though not happily. Ryan watched their truck disappear. "They weren't bad people," he said. "No," Evelyn replied. "That would have made it easier." Daisy's meeting was harder. The Carson family arrived the following week. Ben Carson, 38, was a soft-spoken high school history teacher with a narrow face, dark curly hair, and rectangular glasses that constantly slid down his nose. His wife, Rachel, 36, was a pediatric nurse with sandy blonde hair cut to her shoulders and an open, gentle expression. Their 3 children, 9, 7, and 5, had clearly been warned a dozen times not to overwhelm the puppy. They followed every instruction. They sat on the floor, they spoke quietly, they waited. Daisy still crawled beneath a chair and stayed there. The youngest child whispered, "Did I scare her?" Rachel immediately shook her head. "No, honey. She's just telling us she needs more space." Ryan liked that answer. For 40 minutes, Daisy refused to come out, except once to drink when everyone moved into the kitchen. Ben finally sighed. "I think we could love her," he said, "but I don't think our house would be quiet enough for her to become herself." Evelyn looked genuinely sad. "You're probably right." The family left without a puppy. Madison later said it was the kindest rejection she had seen from both directions. Milo required more work. Laura had already warned them that his resource guarding was mild but real and should not be dismissed because he was young. Eventually they met Teresa Coleman, 54, a divorced accountant from Portsmouth with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair, dark brown skin, powerful forearms, and an unexpectedly soft voice. Teresa had owned 2 German shepherds before, including one with severe food guarding after neglect. She did not reach for Milo during the first meeting. She watched Ryan demonstrate separate feeding, asked detailed questions, and then said, "Good. At least nobody's calling him dominant like it's 1997. Laura laughed immediately. Milo went home with Teresa 10 days later. Penny's placement required a different kind of honesty. A young couple fell in love with her photographs but admitted their fence was only 4 feet high. Ryan looked at Penny, who had already learned to climb halfway up the temporary exercise gate. No. This time Evelyn laughed. Eventually Penny matched with Linda and George Mercer, both in their late 50s, who lived on a fenced rural property and had previously owned an Australian shepherd famous for opening doors. Linda was a broad-faced woman with silver curls and a laugh that arrived before her jokes were finished. George was lanky, bald except for a fringe of gray hair, and worked as an electrician. He examined Penny's favorite escape corner for 3 minutes and said, "I respect an adversary who studies infrastructure." Ryan approved before he could stop himself. Evelyn approved too. Scout eventually went to a 46-year-old park ranger named Calvin Price, a lean, weather-browned man with a quiet voice and an adult daughter living nearby. Calvin wanted a hiking companion, not a security system, and brought photographs of the indoor crate he had already prepared. Daisy found her place last among the 4, with Helen Morris, a 68-year-old widow who lived alone but had adult grandchildren nearby. Helen was small, silver-haired, and moved slowly because of arthritis in both hands. She had owned shy dogs before and did something no previous applicant had done. She came to Grace's house, sat down with a paperback novel, and ignored Daisy completely. 27 minutes later, Daisy came out from beneath the table and lay beside Helen's shoe. Evelyn whispered, "Well, I suppose that's that." By the end of August, only Bean remained. The porch felt larger without the others. Maggie seemed aware of their absence, but not distressed. She spent more time near Evelyn now, and Bean followed Ryan in quiet, indirect ways. He never charged after him like Scout had. He simply appeared nearby, under a chair, beside the kitchen door, at the edge of the yard. One evening, after Bean's final prospective family left, Mark and Ryan sat on the porch steps with 2 glasses of iced tea. Mark had been unusually quiet all day. Ryan finally asked, "What?" Mark rubbed one hand over his jaw. "I owe you an explanation." Ryan waited. Mark stared across the yard. "When Mom fell, everybody started using the same words: assistance, safety, long-term planning, future needs." He gave a short laugh without humor. "Every conversation sounded polite, but I knew what came after it." Ryan said nothing. Mark continued. "If she couldn't manage Maggie, then someone would ask if she could manage the house. If she couldn't manage the house, they'd ask if she should keep living here. I thought if I could get every problem cleaned up fast enough, nobody would start asking the bigger question." So the dogs weren't the problem. They were evidence. Ryan understood immediately. Not because their fears were identical, because their methods were. Ryan had used organization to make uncertainty smaller. Mark had used closure to outrun consequences neither man could control. Ryan looked at him. You know, getting rid of every problem wouldn't have stopped the question. I know that now. It was the first conversation they had ever had in which neither man seemed interested in winning. That night, Ryan received a call from the family scheduled to take Bean the following morning. The husband had been laid off unexpectedly. They were apologetic, embarrassed, and clearly devastated. We just can't do this responsibly right now, the wife said. Ryan told them they were making the right decision. Then he ended the call. Bean was asleep beneath Ryan's chair. The puppy had grown, but he still seemed to fold himself into small spaces. His black muzzle rested across Ryan's boot, one ear finally standing while the other leaned slightly outward. Amy came into the kitchen and saw Ryan looking down. They backed out? Ryan nodded. She followed his gaze. Neither of them said the obvious thing. Ryan had the house, he had money, he understood Bean, he cared about him far more than he had intended. For almost his entire adult life, Ryan had believed an unanswered problem was a problem neglected. Bean shifted in his sleep and placed more weight against Ryan's foot. Ryan could have solved everything with one sentence, I'll keep him. Instead, Ryan leaned back in the chair. He let the question remain unanswered. And for the first time, he discovered that uncertainty did not kill him before morning. Late August had softened the Virginia heat without quite ending it. Mornings outside Suffolk were cooler now, and the first dry leaves had begun gathering beneath Grace Mitchell's porch, catching around the legs of the old wooden table where an entire German Shepherd family had once slept. Only Bean remained. The porch felt strangely oversized with one puppy on it. Ryan Mitchell noticed that more than he wanted to admit. He also noticed that Bean had quietly adapted to being the last. The small, black and tan German Shepherd had filled out since the beginning of summer, though he was still narrower through the shoulders than Scout had been. Both ears stood now, except the left one occasionally tilted outward when he was tired. He had kept his habit of observing before acting. When Ryan opened a door, Bean waited to see where it led. When a strange vehicle entered the driveway, Bean did not bark first. He sat beside the porch step and studied it. And when Ryan moved from one room to another, Bean rarely followed at his heels. He simply appeared a few minutes later somewhere nearby, as if companionship did not require announcement. For 3 days after the prospective family withdrew, Ryan avoided making a decision. That alone would have surprised anyone who knew him well. On the 4th morning, he opened his work calendar. The next 6 months were already crowded. A 10-day training block in North Carolina, 3 weeks supporting an advanced maritime course, several stretches of 12-hour days, a possible reassignment discussion in November that could either leave him in Virginia or change his schedule entirely. Ryan stared at the calendar. Bean slept beneath the desk. It would have been easy to make the numbers work. Ryan had enough money for a dog walker, enough room, enough experience with working breeds, enough discipline to maintain training and veterinary care. He could build a run, install cameras, hire a sitter for travel, arrange backups for the backups. He knew how to engineer responsibility. That was exactly what made the answer uncomfortable. Bean did not need a technically sufficient life. He needed a stable one. Ryan leaned back in the chair. The puppy opened one eye. "You'd be fine here," Ryan said. Bean closed the eye again. Ryan almost laughed. Fine. The word bothered him. He thought of the homes they had rejected over the summer. None of those people had intended harm. Some had offered excellent fencing, expensive food, large yards, good intentions. They had still been wrong for the particular dogs standing in front of them. Why should Ryan be exempt from the same question simply because he loved Bean? That was the part he had not wanted to examine. He did love him. Not dramatically, not in the sentimental way people sometimes claimed an animal had chosen them after 3 photographs and a wagging tail. Ryan loved the small daily things. Bean's hesitation before stepping onto wet grass, The way he slept with his nose tucked beneath one paw, the slow trust with which he had begun placing his chin on Ryan's boot in the evenings. Keeping Bean would make Ryan's life easier emotionally. That did not automatically mean it would make Bean's life better. Amy found him on the porch later that afternoon. "You've been thinking loudly," she said. Ryan looked at her. "That isn't a thing." "With you it is." Bean was stretched beneath Ryan's chair. Amy sat opposite him. "You could keep him." "I know." "You want to?" Ryan took several seconds before answering. "Yes." Amy did not smile. That was one reason he trusted her. He looked toward the yard. "If I keep him, I'm gone for almost 3 weeks in October, 10 days again in December, maybe more after that. I can pay someone." "You can?" "But that isn't the same." Amy waited. Ryan rubbed one thumb along the edge of his coffee mug. "I think part of me wants to keep him because I don't want to be the person left on the porch after everybody goes." Amy's expression softened, but she did not rescue him from the statement. "That's human." It's also not Bean's problem. The following evening, Mark Parker called. Ryan almost let it go to voicemail. Their relationship had improved, but Ryan still associated Mark's name on a screen with a new complication. "Ryan," Mark said, "Sophie wants to ask you something." A second voice came onto the call. Sophie Parker was 16, Mark's only daughter. Ryan had seen her briefly on video calls, but had never spent much time with her. She was tall for her age, around 5'8", with long, medium brown hair that she wore in a loose braid, pale skin that freckled easily across the nose, and gray-blue eyes inherited from Evelyn. Sophie had a reserved manner that could initially seem shy, but Mark had once described her more accurately as someone who preferred to think before wasting words. She volunteered twice a month at a local dog training club near Columbus and had been following Madison's puppy videos from the beginning. "I want to ask about Bean," Sophie said. Ryan's answer formed instantly. No. He remembered Mark wanting the puppies sent to rescue. Boarding Maggie, closing the problem. Ryan nearly spoke, then stopped. "What about him?" Sophie took a breath. "I want us to be considered." Ryan looked toward Bean. "For adoption?" "For a trial first, if Grandma wants that." Ryan said nothing. Mark returned to the call. "Before you say anything, I know what I said before. I remember. I figured." There was no defensiveness in Mark's voice. Ryan began asking questions, not accusations, questions. Where would Bean sleep? Inside. A crate had already been purchased for the family room. Who would handle mornings? Mark before work. Afternoons? Sophie came home from school shortly after 3. Training? They had contacted a trainer recommended by the German Shepherd Club outside Columbus. Sophie had attended an introductory class without Bean, simply to observe. Travel? Mark had spoken with his wife and arranged a nearby boarding option only for emergencies, not as Bean's routine care. Insurance? Checked. Fencing? A contractor had repaired the rear gate the previous weekend. Ryan paused. "You've done homework." Mark laughed quietly. "I had a good spreadsheet example." Ryan deserved that. "What changed?" Mark was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I stopped thinking of the dog as another decision I needed off my desk." Sophie added, "And I don't think Bean needs someone exciting. I think he needs someone predictable." Ryan looked down. Bean had placed his chin across Ryan's boot. Evelyn was brought into the conversation the next day. She did not immediately agree. That pleased Ryan more than it should have. Evelyn asked Sophie questions herself. Who would feed Bean? What happened when school became busy? What would she do if he remained shy around strangers? What if adolescent behavior became harder rather than easier? Sophie did not say, "It'll be fine." She said, "Then we'll work on it." Evelyn finally nodded. A trial. Mark agreed. No triumphant speech followed. Nobody announced that Mark had changed. Ryan understood now that people were not transformed by one correct conversation, any more than dogs were trained by one good afternoon. Mark would have to prove himself on ordinary Tuesdays. That seemed fair. 3 days later, Mark and Sophie arrived in Virginia. The goodbye happened beside the car. Ryan carried Bean's food, medical records, favorite blanket, and the battered rubber toy he had stolen from Scout weeks earlier. Sophie crouched beside Bean but waited until he approached her. Good, Ryan thought. Mark loaded the crate. Amy stood near the porch. Ryan hated the tightness in his chest. He knew this was the right decision. Apparently, the body did not care. Sophie clipped Bean's harness to the back seat restraint. Ryan expected something then. A final look, a whine. Maybe Bean would plant his paws and refuse to leave. People liked those moments because they made affection visible. Bean climbed onto the seat, then immediately grabbed the padded seatbelt strap in his teeth. Bean, Sophie said. He pulled backward. Drop it. Bean pulled harder. Sophie used both hands. Mark began laughing from the driver's seat. Ryan tried not to. Failed. There was his grand farewell, a German Shepherd puppy attempting to dismantle automotive safety equipment. The car pulled away a few minutes later. Bean never looked back. Ryan stood at the edge of the driveway until the vehicle disappeared. Amy came beside him. She was holding something. Grace's yeast roll recipe. Ryan took it. The card was soft at the corners now. The handwriting faded brown with age. His eyes went to the line he had mocked months earlier. Leave it alone. Give it room to rise. Ryan read it twice. Then, instead of correcting the recipe, questioning the timing, or making a joke, he folded the card carefully along its old crease and slipped it into his shirt pocket. The porch behind him was empty. Ryan let it be empty. 4 months later, December had settled quietly over southeastern Virginia. The fields outside Suffolk had gone brown and still. The pecan trees stood mostly bare, and the mornings carried enough cold to turn every breath visible, without covering the world in snow. Ryan Mitchell had expected the empty porch at Grace's house to bother him longer than it did. For the first few weeks after Bean left, he sometimes opened the back door and looked automatically toward the old wooden table, half expecting a black and tan head to appear beneath it. Nothing did. Eventually, the absence stopped feeling like something missing and began to feel like evidence that life had continued somewhere else. The puppies had not disappeared. They had simply become other people's daily problems, joys, scratched furniture, chewed shoes, veterinary appointments, muddy floors, and reasons to laugh. Ryan knew because photographs arrived regularly. Scout, now long-legged and nearly unrecognizable as the thick little puppy that had once tried to climb everything at Grace's house, had destroyed one corner of Calvin Price's living room sofa. Calvin sent Ryan a photograph of the damage with the message, "Apparently park ranger experience does not include upholstery defense." Scout sat beside the wreckage with his ears upright and an expression so solemn that Ryan suspected innocence had already become part of his strategy. Daisy was doing well with Helen Morris, though doing well did not mean becoming outgoing. Helen reported that Daisy still disappeared into the bedroom when unfamiliar visitors arrived. The difference was that she now returned on her own after several minutes, instead of remaining hidden for an entire afternoon. Helen considered that progress and refused to measure it against anyone else's dog. Milo still ate separately at Teresa Coleman's house. Teresa had sent a short video showing him sitting calmly before his bowl while she prepared his meal several feet away. The guarding had improved, but she had not pretended it vanished. "Management is not failure," she wrote beneath the clip. Ryan saved that sentence. Penny had excavated a tunnel beneath one section of Linda and George Mercer's fence that was impressive enough for George to photograph with a tape measure beside it. They reinforced the entire perimeter afterward. Penny responded by beginning research on the gate latch. Bean lived in Ohio with Mark and Sophie. The trial period had become permanent after Evelyn gave her approval 6 weeks in. Sophie sent videos less frequently than Madison once had, but the ones she sent mattered. Bean often slept beneath her desk while she studied. He still hesitated around unfamiliar people, particularly men with deep voices. But instead of vanishing upstairs, he had begun sitting at the end of the hallway and watching. One video showed him studying a visiting neighbor for almost 2 minutes before walking forward, sniffing one shoe and retreating to Sophie. Ryan replayed it twice. Not because it was dramatic, because it was Bean. None of the 5 puppies had become the simplified version people like to imagine at the end of an animal story. Their difficult traits had not evaporated because they had found good homes. Scout was still too enthusiastic, Daisy still needed distance, Milo required structure, Penny regarded fences as personal criticism. Bean remained cautious. The happy part was not that they had become perfect. It was that nobody required perfection as the price of belonging. Maggie had returned home with Evelyn by early autumn. Evelyn's recovery had progressed, though not in the direction she had once imagined. She still needed a cane on days when her hips stiffened, and once or twice a week a local helper came to change bedding, carry groceries, and handle chores that involved ladders or heavy lifting. 3 months earlier, Evelyn would have described that arrangement as losing independence. Now she called it outsourcing my least dignified chores. Maggie seemed pleased with the arrangement. She had regained her healthy weight, her black and tan coat had become glossy again, and after Laura confirmed her recovery from nursing, Maggie was spayed. She slept near Evelyn's chair, stole food whenever Evelyn underestimated the reach of a German shepherd's nose, and barked with deep personal outrage at the garbage truck every Thursday morning. Ryan visited them periodically, but never often enough to turn himself into a permanent part of Maggie's routine. His own routine had resumed too. He was back at the training facility full-time, still arriving earlier than almost everyone else. He still checked equipment twice. He still carried printed backups of schedules, stored electronically in 3 different places. An arrangement Amy described as technological anxiety with a paper trail. Ryan did not object. He had not stopped being himself. One cold morning at the training facility, that became important. A younger operator named Daniel Reeves stood beside a planning table studying a route Ryan had designed for a navigation exercise. Daniel was 28, tall and wiry, with close-cut sandy brown hair, a narrow face, a slightly crooked nose from a college wrestling injury, and clear gray eyes that tended to remain on a problem after everyone else had moved on. He was respectful, but not naturally deferential, a trait that had caused some instructors to label him difficult. Ryan had come to suspect Daniel simply disliked pretending to understand things he did not. Daniel tapped one section of the map. "Chief, I think we should change the approach." Ryan looked over. "No." The answer came before Daniel had finished inhaling, familiar, efficient, automatic. Daniel's mouth closed. Ryan studied the map again. His first impulse was to explain why the existing plan was better. He could already hear the argument in his head. Then something stopped him. Not Maggie, not Bean, not Grace's recipe, just the accumulated discomfort of realizing how often certainty had served as armor. Ryan looked at Daniel. "What are you seeing that I'm not?" Daniel seemed surprised. Then he pointed to the terrain features and explained his concern. The younger man was not entirely right, but he was not entirely wrong either. They adjusted part of the route. The exercise went well. Ryan did not walk away thinking he had become wiser. He simply noticed that asking one question had cost him nothing. A week before Christmas, Amy came to Grace's house carrying groceries and announced that Ryan owed the family one final attempt at yeast rolls. There was never a contract. There was a verbal understanding. There absolutely was not. Amy placed the flour on the counter. Grandma would be ashamed. Grandma wrote recipes without times. Grandma survived 87 years despite this flaw. Ryan made the dough. This time he measured carefully, but stopped when the texture felt right instead of continuing simply because the instructions were vague. He placed the dough in Grace's old ceramic bowl and covered it with a kitchen towel. Amy reached toward the cloth after 20 minutes. Ryan slapped her hand away lightly. "Leave it." Amy froze, then slowly turned toward him. Ryan realized what he had said. "Don't." Her hazel eyes widened theatrically. "Who are you?"
Leave the dough alone. I need to call Madison. You touch your phone and you're making the next batch. Amy smiled.
Neither of them lifted the towel. The rolls were not perfect. Several came out larger than the others, and one browned too heavily along the edge. But when Ryan pulled them apart, steam escaped from a soft center. Amy ate half of one without butter. That's annoyingly good. I'll put that on the recipe card. That evening, Ryan packed several rolls into a paper bag and drove them to Evelyn's house. Warm light filled the front windows. Maggie appeared when he walked onto the porch. She recognized him immediately, her ears lifted. She approached, sniffed his hand, then his coat, probably searching for food with motives less spiritual than Ryan might once have preferred. He scratched lightly behind one ear. After several seconds, Maggie turned away. She walked back to Evelyn and settled beside her chair. Ryan did not call her. He did not need Maggie to remain beside him in order for what had happened between them to matter. Evelyn tasted one of the rolls. Her eyebrows lifted.
Well, Ryan sat opposite her. That sounded surprised.
I remember the first batch. Everybody remembers the first batch. Evelyn smiled. Did you finally figure out how long they're supposed to rise? Ryan looked toward Maggie. The shepherd's head rested across Evelyn's slipper. He looked around the small house that Evelyn had once feared other people might decide she could no longer keep. A cane leaned against the chair. A basket of folded laundry sat nearby, left by the woman who came to help twice a week. None of it looked like defeat. Ryan thought about 5 dogs sleeping in 5 different homes. No, he said. Evelyn waited. Ryan smiled faintly. I think that was the point. Later, he walked back to his truck, carrying nothing but the empty paper bag. Maggie stayed with Evelyn. Bean stayed in Ohio. The 5 puppies did not return to Grace's porch in a neat line to show Ryan what his kindness had accomplished. Their lives had moved beyond him. That no longer felt like being left behind. Ryan had once believed responsibility meant keeping a hand on something until the outcome matched the plan. Now he understood that sometimes responsibility meant preparing a safe place, doing what was necessary while it was necessary, and then having enough humility to remove your hand when your part was finished. He drove back toward Grace's house with the old recipe box sitting on the passenger seat. Across Virginia and beyond, 5 young German shepherds continued becoming whatever they would become. Maggie slept beside Evelyn. Ryan did not know what any of their lives would look like several years from now. For once, he did not need to. Maybe the miracle in this story was never that Maggie remembered an old porch. Maybe it was that 6 dogs taught a man who trusted control that love does not always ask us to hold tighter. We often believe caring means fixing everything for the people we love. We make decisions for aging parents, grown children, friends, even animals, because uncertainty frightens us. But good intentions can still become a cage. Sometimes love means preparing a safe place, offering help, and then giving someone enough room to become who they are, without our hands constantly shaping the outcome. Perhaps that is one of the quiet ways God works. Not every miracle arrives with thunder. Sometimes God sends a lesson through an old recipe, an empty porch, or a mother dog who somehow remembers where she once felt safe. If this story touched something in your life, share it with someone who may need it. Tell us in the comments what Maggie and Ryan's journey meant to you, and subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless your home, protect those you love, and give you wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go.